I was kicked out as a teen for false rumors spread by my brother. Years later, parents see my success and demand money after they abandon me. I was 16 when it all started, and at the time, I couldn't understand why my life was spiraling out of control. My brother, Jake, was only 14, but he had a way of getting under everyone's skin, especially mine. We were typical brothers, I guess. Sometimes we got along, and sometimes we fought like cats and dogs. But I never thought he'd go as far as he did. It began with small things. He'd tell our parents that I was sneaking out at night, hanging out with the wrong crowd, or that I was skipping school. None of it was true, but for some reason, my parents believed him over me. Maybe it was because Jake had always been the golden child. He was the one who got good grades, the one who never caused any trouble. At least, that's what everyone thought. I wasn't a bad kid either, but I guess I wasn't as good at hiding things as Jake was. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured my parents would see through his lies eventually, but things only got worse. He started spreading rumors at school, too, telling people that I was into drugs, that I was stealing money from my parents. The worst part was that people believed him. It's amazing how quickly rumors can spread and how much damage they can do. I went from being a normal high school kid to a social pariah almost overnight. My parents confronted me one night, saying they'd found money missing from their wallets. Of course, Jake was the one who discovered it. I tried to explain that it wasn't me, but they didn't believe a word I said. My dad was furious, saying he was disappointed in me, that I was throwing my life away. My mom just cried, saying she didn't know where they went wrong with me. I was stunned. I hadn't done anything wrong, but it didn't matter. Jake's lies had already done their damage. Things came to a head a few weeks later. My parents had gone through my room while I was at school, searching for drugs or stolen money or whatever else they thought they'd find. They didn't find anything, of course, because there was nothing to find. But that didn't stop them from accusing me of hiding things, of being some kind of master manipulator. I was so angry, I couldn't even see straight. I tried to defend myself, but it was like talking to a brick wall. Jake stood there in the background, smirking like he'd won some kind of twisted game. I couldn't take it anymore. I screamed at him, told him to tell the truth, to stop lying. But he just looked at me with those innocent eyes and said he didn't know what I was talking about. My parents told me I was being irrational, that I needed to get my act together. And then, in a moment that still haunts me, my dad said the words that changed everything: "If you can't live by our rules, you can't live under our roof." I was stunned. They were kicking me out? Over lies? I couldn't believe it. But they were serious. They told me to pack my things and leave. I begged them to reconsider, to listen to me, but they wouldn't. My mom was crying, but she didn't say anything to stop it. Jake just watched with that same smug look on his face. So, I left. I packed a bag with whatever I could grab, and I walked out the door, not knowing where I was going or what I was going to do. I felt like my whole world had been ripped apart, and I had no idea how to put it back together. For the first few days, I just wandered around, crashing at friends' houses when I could. But I knew that wouldn't last forever. I needed to figure something out, and fast. I ended up staying in a rundown motel for a while, using the little bit of money I had saved up from my part-time job. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get by. I dropped out of school because I couldn't handle the stress of trying to survive and go to classes at the same time. It felt like everything was falling apart. My friends tried to help, but most of them didn't know what to do either. I couldn't stay with them forever, and I didn't want to be a burden. So, I started looking for a job, anything that would pay me enough to get by. I found a job working at a fast food place, flipping burgers and cleaning tables. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. The hours were long, and the pay was terrible, but it was all I had. I rented a tiny, one-room apartment in a sketchy part of town. The place was falling apart, but it was better than sleeping on the streets. Those first few months were the hardest of my life. I was lonely, scared, and angry. Angry at Jake for lying, angry at my parents for believing him, and angry at myself for not being able to fix it. I tried to stay in touch with my parents, hoping they'd see how much I was struggling and take me back. But they didn't. They'd made up their minds, and there was no going back. Every time I called, they just told me that I needed to figure things out on my own. So, I did. I started working even more hours, saving up as much money as I could. I knew I couldn't stay in that apartment forever, so I started looking for a better job, something that would pay me enough to get out of that hole. It wasn't easy. I didn't have a high school diploma, and I didn't have any real experience. But I was determined to make something of myself, no matter how hard it was. After a while, I managed to get a job as a delivery driver for a local company. The pay was better, and the hours were more regular. I saved up enough to move into a slightly better apartment, one that didn't feel like it was going to collapse at any moment. It wasn't much, but it was a step up, and I felt like I was finally starting to get my life together. As time went on, things slowly started to improve. I got my GED and started taking classes at the local community college. It was tough, balancing work and school, but I was determined to do it. I wanted to prove to myself, and to my parents, that I wasn't the screw-up they thought I was. I worked hard, studying late into the night and working long hours during the day. I didn't have much of a social life, but I didn't care. I was focused on my future, on building a life that I could be proud of. And slowly, it started to pay off. I finished my associate's degree and transferred to a state university. It was a big step, and I was terrified, but I knew it was the right thing to do. University was a whole new world. It was challenging, and there were times when I felt like I was in over my head, but I kept pushing forward. I made some new friends, people who didn't know about my past, who didn't judge me for the mistakes I'd made. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. I majored in business, and I found that I had a knack for it. I loved the challenge of solving problems, of coming up with strategies and plans. I threw myself into my studies, determined to succeed. And I did. I graduated with honors, something I never thought I'd be able to do. I landed a decent job right out of college, working for a small startup. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. Things were finally starting to look up. I moved into a nicer apartment, bought a car, and started to build a life for myself. I met a girl, Sarah, who was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner. She was smart, funny, and kind, and she didn't care about my past. We fell in love, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had a future to look forward to. Then, out of the blue, I got a call from my mom. I hadn't heard from my parents in years, not since they kicked me out. Hearing her voice on the other end of the line was like a punch to the gut. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened as she told me that they wanted to meet up. She said they'd heard about my success, that they were proud of me. Proud? That word hit me like a ton of bricks. Where had that pride been when I needed it the most? I agreed to meet them, though part of me didn't want to. I guess I still had a small sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. We met at a coffee shop, and when I saw them, I was shocked at how much they'd aged. My dad's hair was mostly gray now, and my mom looked tired, worn out. We exchanged pleasantries, catching up on the years that had passed. It was awkward, like we were strangers who didn't know how to talk to each other. But then, they got to the real reason they wanted to see me. They needed money. Jake had run into some trouble, he'd lost his job, and he was living back at home, not contributing anything. They were struggling financially, and they wanted to know if I could help them out. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything they'd put me through, after abandoning me when I needed them the most, they had the audacity to ask me for money? I felt a mix of anger and hurt bubbling up inside me. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them how much they'd hurt me, how I'd had to claw my way out of the hole they'd thrown me into. But instead, I just sat there, stunned. My mom started crying, saying they were sorry for everything that had happened, that they didn't know what else to do. My dad just stared at his hands, not saying a word. I could see the desperation in their eyes. I sat there, staring at my parents as they poured out their story of hardship. It felt surreal, like I was watching it all from outside my body. My mom's voice was trembling as she explained how things had gone downhill with Jake. He'd gotten into debt, and now he was relying on them to bail him out. My dad finally looked up and said that they needed my help, that they were out of options. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I was torn between the anger that had been building up inside me for years and the guilt that was starting to creep in. Part of me wanted to tell them exactly how much they'd hurt me, how they'd abandoned me without a second thought. But another part of me, the part that still longed for their approval, felt the urge to help them, to prove that I wasn't the failure they thought I was. I took a deep breath and finally spoke. "Do you have any idea what you put me through?" My voice was calm, but I could feel the anger simmering just below the surface. "You kicked me out based on lies, and you never even gave me a chance to explain. I had to fend for myself, drop out of school, work crappy jobs just to survive. And now you come back, asking for money, like none of that ever happened?" My mom started crying harder, but I didn't stop. "I've worked my ass off to get where I am. Everything I have, I earned. You weren't there for me when I needed you, and now you want me to save you? How is that fair?" My dad tried to interject, but I cut him off. "No, let me finish. I've spent years trying to forget what you did, trying to move on. But you coming here, asking for help, just brings it all back. You chose Jake over me, and now you're paying the price for that choice. It's not my responsibility to fix your mistakes." There was silence for a few moments as they took in what I'd said. My mom wiped her eyes and said, "We know we were wrong. We were scared, and we didn't know what to do. But Jake is our son too. We couldn't just turn our backs on him. Like you did to me?" I shot back, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. You didn't hesitate to turn your backs on me. Why is he any different? My dad finally spoke, his voice low and filled with regret. We were wrong, and we know that now. But we're in a bad spot, and we don't know how to get out of it. We're asking for your help because we don't have anyone else to turn to. I could see the desperation in their eyes, and it made me feel sick to my stomach. I wanted to help them, but I couldn't forget the pain they'd caused me. I couldn't just let it go like nothing had happened. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said quietly. I've spent years trying to rebuild my life, trying to move on from what you did. I'm not the same person I was back then. And I don't know if I can ever trust you again. My mom reached across the table and grabbed my hand, her eyes pleading. We're sorry. We really are. We just didn't know how to handle everything. Please, give us another chance. We don't expect you to forgive us right away, but please, just help us this once. I pulled my hand away, feeling conflicted. I didn't want to be the person who held on to grudges, but I also didn't want to be taken advantage of. I'd worked too hard to get where I was, and I wasn't going to let them drag me down again. I need time to think, I finally said. I can't just give you money without considering everything that's happened. You hurt me in ways you can't even imagine, and I don't know if I'm ready to forgive you for that. They nodded, and my mom wiped away more tears. We understand. Just, please don't shut us out completely. We want to make things right. I didn't respond to that. I just stood up and walked out of the coffee shop, my mind spinning with everything that had just happened. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to help them, to be the bigger person. But another part of me, the part that had spent years struggling to survive on my own, couldn't let go of the anger and hurt. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that conversation. I kept replaying it in my head, wondering if I'd made the right decision by not giving them an answer right away. Sarah noticed that something was bothering me, and finally, I told her everything. She listened quietly, letting me get it all out. When I was done, she took my hand and said, "You have every right to be angry. What they did was wrong, and it's not your responsibility to fix their mistakes. But you also need to think about what will make you feel at peace. Holding on to that anger won't help you in the long run." I know, I admitted. But it's hard to just let go of everything. They threw me out like I was nothing, and now they want me to save them. I don't know if I can do that. You don't have to, she said gently. You've built a life for yourself, and you don't owe them anything. But if you decide to help them, do it on your terms. Don't let them take advantage of you. Her words stuck with me. I knew she was right. I didn't owe them anything, but if I did decide to help, it would be because I wanted to, not because they guilted me into it. A few days later, I called my parents and asked them to meet me again. This time, I was going to be the one in control of the conversation. We met at the same coffee shop, and I could see the anxiety in their eyes as I sat down. I didn't waste any time getting to the point. I've thought about what you said, I began. And I've decided that I will help you, but there are going to be conditions. First, I'm not just going to hand you money. I'll help you get back on your feet, but I'm not your ATM. Second, you need to take responsibility for what happened. I want a sincere apology from both of you, and I want to know that you're going to work on rebuilding our relationship. This isn't just about money, it's about trust. They both nodded, and my dad spoke up first. We understand. And we're sorry, truly sorry. We made a lot of mistakes, and we regret the way we handled things. We want to make things right, not just for us, but for you too. My mom added, we know we hurt you, and we're sorry. We didn't handle things the way we should have, and we want to make it up to you. We'll do whatever it takes to rebuild our relationship. I looked at them, trying to gauge their sincerity. They seemed genuine, but after everything that had happened, it was hard to trust them completely. Okay, I said finally. I'll help you, but this is the last time. If you want to rebuild our relationship, it's going to take time, and it's going to take effort on both sides. I'm willing to try, but I need to know that you're committed too. They both nodded, and for the first time in years, I felt a small glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. After that conversation, things slowly started to change. I helped my parents get their finances in order, but I made it clear that this was a one-time thing. I wasn't going to bail them out again if they fell back into the same patterns. Jake, on the other hand, was a different story. He was still living at home, still causing problems, and my parents were struggling to deal with him. I tried to stay out of it as much as possible, but it was hard when they kept coming to me for advice. Eventually, I had a talk with Jake. I told him that he needed to take responsibility for his actions and start contributing to the household. He didn't take it well, but I didn't back down. I wasn't going to let him drag our parents down any further. It took a while, but eventually, Jake started to change. He got a job, started paying rent, and began to take his life more seriously. It wasn't a perfect transformation, but it was a start. As for my relationship with my parents, it was still a work in progress. We talked more often, and they made an effort to be more supportive and understanding. There were still moments of tension, but for the most part, things were getting better. I didn't fully trust them yet, and I wasn't sure if I ever would. But I was willing to give them a chance, to see if we could rebuild what had been broken. Years passed, and things continued to improve. I got married to Sarah, and we started a family of our own. My parents were thrilled to be grandparents, and they made an effort to be a part of our lives. It wasn't always easy, but I appreciated the effort they were making. Jake eventually moved out and got his own place. He was doing better, though he still had his ups and downs. We weren't close, but we were civil, and that was enough for me. Looking back, I realized that I'd come a long way since those dark days when I was kicked out of my parents' house. I'd built a life for myself, one that I was proud of, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. My parents had made mistakes, but they were trying to make things right. And while I wasn't sure if I'd ever fully forgive them, I was willing to try. I didn't want to carry the weight of that anger and hurt with me forever. It was time to let go, to move forward, and to focus on the future. In the end, I learned that family is complicated. It's messy, and it's not always fair. But sometimes, people deserve a second chance. Not because they've earned it, but because holding on to the past can weigh you down more than you realize. So, I chose to let go of the anger, to let go of the hurt, and to focus on building a better future, for myself, for Sarah, for our children, and yes, even for my parents. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was a start.